A favorite expression among mechanics runs, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. Change for change's sake is seldom a good idea. Yet between the end of the 1992 season and the beginning of the 1993 campaign, the two pace-setting teams in Formula One, Williams and McLaren, both underwent major change. Champion team Williams retained its powerful Renault engines and high-tech chassis, but had lost world champion Nigel Mansell and teammate Riccardo Patrese. Triple champion Alain Prost came to the team after a year away from the cockpit and was joined by former champion Graham Hill's son Damon, who had just 2 Grand Prix starts to his name, but many thousands of miles testing the Williams under his belt. After enjoying 5 years of Honda power, McLaren's new car was built around Ford's V8 engine. The team had signed Michael Andretti. A former IndyCar champion and accomplished racer, the American was nevertheless a complete Formula One rookie. Team stalwart Ayrton Senna had still not signed a contract for 1993. He would test the car just before the season start and decide then whether to race it or not. McLaren signed rising Finnish star Mika Hakkinen just in case. And by the end of the 1993 season, both teams would once more be in a state of flux, forced to plan their development around unknowns. In 1993, Williams and McLaren, like the rest of Formula One, truly felt the winds of change. To further muddy the waters, the governing body had insisted on narrower tires for the 1993 season. Maximum width had been slashed from 18 to 15 inches, the tires now offering up almost 1/5 less rubber area to the road. The decision had been relayed to Goodyear in July 1992, but amazingly, by September, the company's engineers had new style tires ready for the teams to test. Making the tires narrower inevitably reduced tread life and increased operating temperatures. This was overcome by a brand new rubber compound which boasted better heat transfer properties, offering longer racing life and better grip. Many observers had forecast that the change to the regulations would mean slower lap speeds, but that was seldom the case, a tribute to the skill of the company's engineers. Not content with meeting this challenge, Goodyear also introduced a brand new wet weather tire, the Quattro. The new tire was asymmetrical in tread pattern, unidirectional, and offered even better water clearance properties than its predecessor for superior wet weather grip. But the fine weather in South Africa ensured that the new rain tires remained unused, for the first race at least. If their opponents had hoped that all this preseason confusion would hamper Williams and McLaren, they were mistaken. At Kyalami, Prost and Senna topped the timesheets. Senna made his experience tell, grabbing the lead. Teammate Michael Andretti was left stranded on the grid, and Hill's inexperience showed too. Senna led Schumacher, who had slipped into second, but Prost was soon exploiting his Renault V10's horsepower advantage. Year off or not, Prost was clearly in sparkling form and determined to start his season right by beating longtime rival Senna. Again, Renault's V10 did its job, and Prost took the lead of the race for the first time in more than a year and a half. Prost held on to his lead after stopping for fresh tires, but behind him, Schumacher was in trouble. Diving deep inside, Senna to challenge for second, spinning out as they touched. Any question marks over Prost's competitiveness were brushed aside as convincingly as were his rivals, the Frenchman opening his scorecard with a perfect 10 points. Prost made the most of pole position in Brazil to head Senna, while behind, Andretti's race came to a spectacular end on the first corner. As the leaders sped on, the dust was still settling at the scene of the American's violent crash, caused when he'd tangled with Berger's Ferrari. Though their cars had slammed into the barriers with frightening violence, both men were unhurt. Andretti had yet to complete a racing lap. Prost began to extend his lead as Senna fell back into the clutches of Damon Hill in the second Williams. Despite all Brazil willing him on, their hero succumbed to the young Englishman, who was out to make his mark after retiring in South Africa. A rainstorm swept the circuit, and Senna led the rush to change onto wet weather tires. Prost slid off into the Minardi of Christian Fittipaldi, one of 3 wrecked cars on the straight. Now Hill led the race. Senna stopped first for slicks as the track began to dry, and though Hill rejoined in the lead after his change, Senna promptly scythed past to take his second Brazilian Grand Prix victory ahead of young rivals Hill and Schumacher. At Donington, Senna knew the rain offered a chance to compete with the Williams pair, and he took it with both hands. Edged into 5th at the first corner, he drove an opening lap of mesmeric skill and audacity. He splashed inside Schumacher through the first turn before inventing a new racing line to hurtle down around the outside of Carl Wendling's Sauber. This was Senna at his absolute best. In the atrocious conditions, he disposed of Hill with consummate ease and even passed leader Prost before the lap was out. Senna changed onto slicks, the first of a record 63 tire stops in the constantly changing conditions. Senna lost the lead with a stuck wheel nut, but Prost made no less than 7 stops, compounding his misery by stalling the car and being lapped by Senna as he rejoined. In stark contrast, Johnny Herbert stopped only once, keeping the same set of slicks on his Lotus for the rest of the race. He more than deserved 4th place. After Senna's, the best drive of the race came from his countryman Rubens Barrichello. He had seemed destined for a podium finish in only his 3rd Grand Prix when his Jordan Yamaha died 5 laps from home. Senna had no such worries. A lap ahead of the opposition, he cruised to his 2nd consecutive victory on what was undoubtedly the day of the Equatro. He was now more than 1 win clear of championship favorite Prost in the point standings. With Donington still fresh in his mind, the wet start at Imola could hardly have filled Prost with glee, particularly when Senna and Hill led away as Mark Blundell crashed out in his Ligier. On the damp surface, Hill skated across the grass while Prost lined up to pass Senna. As Prost knew he would, Senna made his McLaren as hard to pass as possible, but the 80 horsepower advantage that Prost enjoyed carried him ahead. Prost followed Senna's lead, changing onto slicks as the track dried. Schumacher was in 4th place when he made his stop, while Hill lost the lead to Senna as he came into change. Prost fought his way past both Senna and Hill to lead for the first time. But Hill was in trouble with locking brakes and soon out of the race, while Andretti, into his stride for the first time, was caught out by a similar problem. Young Italian Alessandro Zanardi retired his Lotus for rather more obvious reasons. Senna's challenge evaporated and Schumacher moved up to 2nd as a result. Prost, troubled by his throttle sticking open, could now ease off to the flag. The Frenchman's emphatic win put his championship challenge back on the rails. At the start of a Grand Prix, the red lights are supposed to go green. In Spain, they flashed yellow, but it might as well have been purple, for everyone started anyway, led by Hill. At the first corner, Senna tried to pass, but Hill and Prost boxed him in. As he dropped into 3rd position, the Brazilian knew he'd have a job on his hands just keeping the Williams pair in sight. Hill kept Prost at bay for 10 laps, but the Frenchman's car was better on full tanks. As the fuel load lightened, it was Hill's Williams that was faster, and the youngster harried his team leader mercilessly until his engine blew. At this stage, Schumacher was closing on Senna, intent on separating the Brazilian from 2nd. His chase ended when he came upon Zanardi laying oil. Exhausted but delighted, Prost scored win number 3, slipping into a narrow 2-point lead over Senna. Schumacher passing Hill for 3rd in the championship standings. Not since 1983 had anyone other than Prost or Senna won in Monaco. Senna's magnificent against-the-odds victory over Nigel Mansell in 1992 had equaled Graham Hill's all-time record. It was fitting then that Graham's son was one of Senna's chief rivals as he tried for his 6th win. But Prost was aiming to take his 5th Monaco victory, making perhaps the best start of his career. Schumacher shot after him as Senna squeezed Hill out of third place at the first corner. Andretti's first visit to Monaco did not start at all well. Schumacher led the chase of Prost, followed by Senna, Hill, and the two Ferraris. Suddenly, Schumacher led as Prost was called in for a stop-and-go penalty. The stewards had decided that he'd jumped the start, moving before the green light came on. His penalty was worsened when Prost twice stalled the Williams. He rejoined a lap down but would fight back to fourth. Hydraulic failure robbed Schumacher of an almost certain first Monaco win. But Schumacher's bad luck was Senna's good. He now led the race he has made his own by more than 15 seconds from Hill. Damon was in trouble, rudely assaulted by Berger's Ferrari. While the Austrian stalled and blocked Andretti, Hill calmly selected first gear and motored on, chased by Alesi in the other Ferrari. But Hill could do nothing about Senna. One day soon, perhaps, he will add to the family tally at Monaco. But for now, the principality belongs to Senna. And the Brazilian made no mistakes, scoring that record 6th Monaco victory. McLaren boss Ron Dennis was smiling, but with 6 of 16 races already run, Senna had still to sign for the rest of the season, and things would be getting harder for the McLarens. In Canada, the FIA, the sport's governing body, decreed that all the cars which used electronic control systems were illegal. The teams affected, including Williams, McLaren, Benetton, Ferrari, and Lotus, all raced under appeal. But the repercussions of this decision were to rumble on all year. Sophisticated electronics controlled almost every aspect of the top-line Grand Prix cars, from suspension and braking to engine and gearbox. Pit-to-driver radio links allowed the engineers in the pits to alter any aspect of the car's performance while it was on the track. But the costs were huge. The FIA saw its chance to try and close the gap between the haves and have-nots. From 1994, all electronic driver aids were to be banned. Meanwhile, Williams used its lead in the field to great advantage. Prost and Hill comfortably ahead of Schumacher, while Senna qualified only 8th, his lowest ever grid position for McLaren. Schumacher made a truly dreadful start, but Senna was already on the move, scrabbling desperately past Patrese Benetton in the first corners, using the curbs and the grass to get past. Next, he muscled past Alesi's Ferrari and set his sights on Berger, whom he passed to take third. Hill lost the lead to Prost and dropped to 4th after a long tire stop. Schumacher drove like a demon to catch Senna, but suddenly the McLaren stopped and Schumacher just brushed past. No problems for Prost, though. His 4th win of the season allowing him to regain control of the championship, even if he only led Senna by 5 points. Renault pulled out all the stops at Magny-Cours, filling the first 4 places on the grid, its engines powering the Williams pair and the Ligiers of Martin Brundle and Marc Blundell. The leader Hill pitted, leaving right behind Andretti. Accelerating flat out, the pair just missed Carl Wendlinger's Sauber, which was waved out of its pit right in front of them. This delay and a couple of quick laps by Prost meant that the Frenchman rejoined in the lead after his stop. Hill pressed hard, but to no avail. Senna and Schumacher were locked in mortal combat. A second tire stop late on tipped the balance in the Germans' favor. Prost and Hill could hardly have chosen a better place to post the first Williams-Renault 1-2 of the season. Prost was clearly delighted to win in front of his appreciative home crowd for the 6th time and put himself more than 1 win clear of Senna. If Prost could win in France, maybe a home crowd would give Hill the extra edge he seemed to need to take his first Grand Prix victory. Things certainly looked good at the start. He led as Senna elbowed slow-starting Prost out of 2nd. Hill made his first ever Grand Prix start at Silverstone in 1992, and now it looked as if he might score his first victory in front of a home crowd as well. Prost, meanwhile, battled to get past Senna. Ford's V8 was less thirsty than Renault's V10, and Ayrton's car was always quick in the opening laps with its relatively light fuel load. That would not normally have been enough to hold up Prost for long, but holding off his rival is one task that Senna particularly relished. Finally, Prost found a piece of road free of red and white car and slipped past. Now it was Schumacher's turn to deal with Senna. The Benetton was set up to be fast in a straight line, and that was enough to safely carry Schumacher past. Leader Hill was having the race of his life, trading fastest laps with Prost. Senna took an early tire change, Prost coming in just after Hill and using his new Goodyear rubber to close right up on his teammate. The safety car came out while a stranded car was removed from the trackside. Hill broke away once racing recommenced, building a lead before his engine failed. Hill's hopes of a win were cruelly dashed. The disappointment was hard to conceal. For Prost, though, another Formula One milestone, his 50th Grand Prix victory, and there were smiles for Benetton too, the British-based team taking second and third. Hill once again got away better than Prost at Hockenheim, but Michael Schumacher had the best start of all, rocketing into second. Behind the younger rivals, Prost and Senna locked horns once more, the Brazilian coming off second best again. Hill and Schumacher held center stage and looked to be making this their race. At Hockenheim, though, horsepower counts for more than a home crowd, and Prost had plenty of it. Soon the Frenchman grabbed the lead from his teammate, too. But Hill had it handed back to him when Prost was called in for a stop-and-go penalty. He'd gone over a chicane on lap 1 when he saw Brundle's spinning Ligier heading straight at him. The judges decided he'd gained some sort of advantage from this move, as had Brundle, who was also called in for punishment. This time, Hill had it in the bag, until debris caused a puncture less than 2 laps from his first win. Prost canted home to victory, penalty and all. Schumacher may not have won his home race, but second felt pretty good and the German fans were delighted. Hill took an uncontested lead in Hungary as poleman Prost stalled on the warm-up lap and was forced to start from the back. Senna, Schumacher, and Berger hotly contested second. As Hill and Senna streaked away, Schumacher challenged Berger in a close battle. The Ferrari driver had undergone surgery to an injured elbow before the race and would have another operation after it. Yet he shrugged off the problem, seeming in top form despite the searing heat. Conversely, Schumacher seemed far less convincing. The German lost control of his car, dropping down the order with the first of 2 spins. Prost pitted, his rear wing breaking loose. While the mechanics struggled to fix Prost's car, Hill arrived for new tires. It was a tight squeeze, but he was soon on his way again. Schumacher called it a day after his second spin. Prost finally rejoined 7 laps down and with no hope of gaining any points. Hill ran trouble-free to the flag, taking his maiden Grand Prix victory and setting a record. The first time the son of a Grand Prix winner had scored a Formula One win. After coming so close at the last 2 races, his delight was clear. Belgium in '92 was the scene of Schumacher's first Grand Prix win, but his awful start made a repeat in '93 look unlikely. Indeed, both he and Patrese were swamped by the field as Prost led away. Senna briefly held second before Hill played the Renault horsepower trump card. On the long climb out of Eau Rouge, there is no substitute for sheer grunt. Schumacher seemed jet-propelled as he scrambled back up the field, out-dragging a Lacey, who was soon to retire, his Ferrari too dangerous to drive. With Prost in his sights, Hill made an early pit stop, taking on fresh Goodyear Eagles. The strategy worked. When Prost was in and out quickly, his teammate blasted by into the lead as he rejoined. Schumacher drove like a man possessed, even passing Prost. But Hill was equal to the challenge and scored his second consecutive victory, Williams sealing a 6th Constructors' title. After Hungary, there might have been suggestions that Hill's win had been fortunate, Belgium was a tough race, and he won it well. Hill had proved that he was a real racer. The Ferrari fans were out in force at Monza, despite the run of Williams' successes. Prost led away, but all the excitement was behind him at the first corner. As Alesi streaked into second, Senna bounced over Hill. Further back, both footworks, a Sauber and both Jordans, crashed out. Senna laid claim to the same piece of road as Hill, and the McLaren was launched over the rear of the Williams. Amazingly, neither car seemed damaged. As Prost headed out into the country, Senna unaccountably slammed into the back of Brundle's Ligier. Both cars were out on the spot. Berger, the last of the late breakers, tried to hold off the recovering Hill, but the Englishman was having none of it. Prost charged on. Victory here could win him the championship. Schumacher was out of the hunt, but Andretti was driving superbly. He finally had the measure of his McLaren, was able to do what he does so well, race. He grabbed sixth from Wendlinger on his way to a fine third. As Prost eased up in the last few laps, Hill closed. Suddenly, the race fell into his lap as the leader's engine blew in spectacular fashion. As Prost stepped out of his car, Alesi earned the adulation of the crowd with a second place for Ferrari. Just after Hill scored his hat trick, Christian Fittipaldi careered into the back of his Minardi teammate Pierluigi Martini. Amazingly, both were unhurt. Joining Hill and Alesi on the podium was Andretti, getting a share of the limelight in what was his last race as he and McLaren parted company. As Prost had done in Hungary, Hill stalled on the parade lap and was forced to start from the back in Estoril. That left a gap on the front row beside Prost, and Senna, Alesi, Schumacher, and Mika Hakkinen in the second McLaren all went for it. As Prost was rudely elbowed aside, Alesi seized the lead from Hakkinen with Senna in third. Prost was kept busy by Schumacher while Alesi enjoyed himself in his Ferrari holding the lead. Senna squeezed ahead of Hakkinen to take second, but even he could make no impression on Alesi's flying Ferrari. Suddenly, Senna was out. Engine. Alesi and Hakkinen pitted together and left the pits nose to tail. On cold tires, Hakkinen tried everything to get past the Ferrari. The two youngsters fought tooth and nail. It was gripping stuff. Prost, who had announced he'd retire from Formula One at the end of the season, now led from Hill and Schumacher, who had already stopped for tires. When the Williams pair pitted, the race was left in Schumacher's hands. Hakkinen was following Alesi closely and lost grip as his McLaren's downforce was reduced. Out of control, he bounced off the barriers before careering across the track. Though his car was destroyed, the Finn was unhurt. Moments later, another near miss. Berger had left the pits so fast, his Ferrari's electronic brain was fooled into thinking that it was on the straight. It lowered the car's ride height accordingly and simply couldn't cope with the bumps at the pit exit. Prost closed on Schumacher and made several attempts to pass. It was clear, however, that the German was intent on winning this one, and second would be good enough to seal the championship. The Frenchman decided on the sensible course of action. Schumacher was ecstatic, as was Benetton boss Flavio Briatore. Prost celebrated his fourth world championship, and the elder statesman looked every bit as pleased as the two young bloods alongside him. With the massive crowd at Suzuka as backdrop, Prost and Senna lined up alongside each other. McLaren having finally closed the performance gap to Williams just as it had in '92. Indeed, at the first corner, McLaren was ahead. Senna tried to shake off Prost in the early laps, but while they kept out of trouble, there were problems at the chicane. Berger and Hill took up all the road, leaving Schumacher nowhere to go. As Berger blocked Hill's passing attempt, Schumacher tried to stay inside the Williams too. Though Hill's car was undamaged, the Benetton was out. In the pits, the teams waited as the long-threatened rain finally came. Senna had lost the lead, stopping for new slicks, but now made the best of the conditions to reel in and repass Prost. Both lead drivers were still on slicks, but not for long. Senna was soon on his way. Prost's new tires were on, but he was forced to wait as Hakkinen came into his pit, immediately ahead of the Williams. As the McLaren stopped, the Williams was finally able to leave, but Prost had lost more than 20 seconds. Senna lapped newcomer Eddie Irvine and closed on Hill, with whom the Jordan driver was battling for fourth. But the McLaren was held up by the slick-tired Williams, and Irvine dived past them both into the chicane. It may have been Irvine's first Grand Prix, but the Irishman knew Suzuka intimately, thanks to several years of racing in Japan. In the wet conditions, he was able to harry Hill and keep Senna behind for several laps. Finally, both got away, and Senna passed Hill. The Brazilian now had the race firmly under control and dictated the pace to the flag, taking his fourth win of the year to the delight of the local fan club. It had been 5 months since his last win in Monaco, and Senna was clearly happy with his performance. On the streets of Adelaide, Senna took pole, the first time in 24 races that a Williams had failed to do so, and carried his advantage through to the first corner. He quickly built a lead from Prost, Hill, and Schumacher, who stopped very early for tires. The German's tactic to upset the status quo might have worked but for an engine failure. Hill had stopped and rejoined just ahead of Hakkinen, who had quickly passed him to take third. It was a close-fought battle. Hakkinen, once again impressive in the McLaren, but in the end, Hill's Williams slipped back ahead. Prost led when Senna stopped, but dropped back to second when he pitted for new tires. Hakkinen retired with brake problems, while Hill closed on Prost, giving his teammate a hard time as they battled over second place until he misjudged a passing attempt. As Hill's hopes of second faded, so did Prost's of winning. Senna was simply uncatchable, and the Frenchman would have to be content with runner-up slot in his last ever Grand Prix. Senna's win was also McLaren's 104th, making the Team Formula One's most successful ever, a fitting way for the partnership to end. And Prost, in a Formula One cockpit for the last time, took his final checkered flag. On the podium, Senna at last felt able to greet his longtime rival warmly. Prost, a champion for the fourth time and the most successful Grand Prix driver in history, took his last bow. And Senna, who had contributed so much to McLaren's success over his 6-year stay there, and who was now leaving to fill Prost's empty seat at Williams, must have shared the Frenchman's mixed emotions. Undoubtedly, they could both feel the winds of change.